a shattered teacup, and one secret no one should have missed. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Where are you listening from today? Share it in the comments. Your voices make this journey unforgettable. I treasure everyone. It had been raining all afternoon, a thin, unhurried drizzle that painted the windows of Maigret's office in pale grey strokes and gave the pavements along the boulevard Richard Lenoir a dull sheen. The radiator was making that hollow, uneven ticking it did when it hadn't yet decided whether to be warm or cold. Maigret sat behind his desk, not working, simply staring at the curling tendril of smoke from his pipe and listening to the faraway murmur of voices in the corridor. On the corner of his desk sat a small brown paper bag. It was from the baker's on Rue de Turenne, and inside was a slice of apple tart Madame Maigret had insisted he bring back with him after lunch. He had promised her he would eat it before the end of the day, though it now seemed unlikely. His mind wasn't on the tart or on the few case files scattered in front of him. It was on the steady, soft patter of rain outside and the peculiar satisfaction of not having to rush anywhere. The telephone rang, and Maigret didn't move immediately to answer it. He let it ring twice, his large hand eventually lifting the receiver as if he'd already anticipated the weight of the call. Maigret. The voice on the other end was hesitant, uncertain, not official. A woman's voice, quiet and unpolished, as though she was speaking from a hallway where others might overhear. She gave her name, Madame d'Arras, and an address in the 11th arrondissement. Something had happened, she said, though she wasn't sure if it was something for the police. Her husband had found a woman lying in the small back parlour of their boarding house. Not dead, but unconscious. There was tea on the table, 2 cups, one broken, and the saucer missing. Her voice was trembling now. She didn't know the woman well, a lodger in one of the upstairs rooms, but she was certain something was wrong. The husband thought it was fainting, perhaps a fall, but Madame d'Arras kept repeating, the teacup was broken, and it wasn't hers. There was no urgency in Maigret's reply. He told her he would pass the matter to the local station if necessary, but that he might come by himself first. She seemed relieved at that, as though she had wanted not the police, but him. 10 minutes later, Maigret was pulling on his overcoat, tucking his scarf close at the neck. The damp air outside felt almost warm against his face. It was early evening now. Shopkeepers were drawing their shutters, and in the cafe across the street a few men leaned heavily over their glasses of white wine, talking without moving their lips much. He took his time walking to the address she had given him. The streets were ordinary, the kind where you might pass the same baker twice in a day and not notice, where neighbours nodded but never spoke. Somewhere a radio was playing a waltz, tinny and far away. When he reached the boarding house, a tall, narrow building with a single dim bulb burning above the door, he could smell damp wood and old cooking before he stepped inside. Madame d'Arras was waiting in the hallway, short, with a round face that looked as though it had once been cheerful. She kept smoothing her apron, glancing toward the back room. She's awake now, she whispered, as though that changed nothing. But she says she doesn't remember falling. And the cup. Her eyes flickered toward a low table by the wall, where half of a porcelain teacup lay in 2 clean pieces, the handle intact. Maigret didn't ask questions right away. He stood in the hall, shrugging off his coat, breathing in the scent of tea leaves and a faint trace of something sour, like fruit left too long in a bowl. In the stillness, he could hear someone moving in the room beyond, the slight scrape of a chair against the floor. "May I?" he asked at last, and Madame d'Arras stepped aside. In the parlour, a woman of about 30 sat at a small table, her hands wrapped around the remaining teacup. She looked up at him, not startled, but guarded, as if she had been expecting him, though she had not known from where or when. Her dark hair was pinned too neatly for someone who had supposedly collapsed. And on the floor, by her chair, Maigret noticed a faint crescent of tea stains, as though something had been spilled, then hastily wiped away. It was nothing, and yet it wasn't. Maigret nodded to her, his expression unreadable. He asked her name, and she gave it softly, watching him as though trying to decide what sort of man he was. Her lips pressed together when he mentioned the broken cup. She said she didn't remember it breaking, but her voice had the same small hesitation as the pause in Madame Darras's earlier call. In the corner of the room, on a sideboard crowded with cheap china, stood a row of matching cups and saucers, all unbroken, all identical, except that the broken one on the table had a different pattern. Maigret didn't touch it. He simply looked at it for a long time, letting the rain against the windows fill the silence, and wondering why a stranger's cup had been in her hands at all. If you'd like, I can now carry the story forward into the atmospheric arrival scene, where Maigret begins absorbing the boarding house's quiet tensions, setting the stage for the slow unraveling. That would deepen the mood and bring the first hints of unease into focus. Maigret did not sit. His bulk seemed to fill the little parlour without effort, a quiet obstruction that altered the air by a degree or two. He looked once more at the two pieces of porcelain on the table. Thin, white, a spray of blue cornflowers that did not match the rose-trimmed cups on the sideboard, and then let his gaze drift to the window, where rain made ribbons on the glass. The woman's hands resumed their grip on the intact teacup, but she did not drink. The steam had gone. "You're feeling better," he said, as if commenting on the weather. "A little. It was silly," she answered. Her voice had the flatness of a hand-smoothing cloth. "I stood up quickly, I think. I've not eaten enough today." He nodded, as though that were sufficient. "Mademoiselle?" "Bernard. Lise Bernard. You live here?" His eyes flicked toward the ceiling, then back. "On the second floor, a small room at the back." "You work?" "I do some bookkeeping for a small import firm, near the Canal Saint-Martin." She said it without hesitation. It hung in the air without weight, like a coat on a peg. From the hall came the creak of a stair tread, and Madame Darras's anxious whisper, "Alain, doucement." The husband's shoes stopped scuffing. He was a narrow man with a narrow head, the sort who had made a habit of walking on the edges of carpets. He stood at the threshold, wiping his hands on a cloth that had the ghost of last night's sauce upon it. "If it's nothing, monsieur," he began, already apologizing for the disturbance to his house and his evening. "We will take her upstairs. My wife—" "It is probably nothing," Maigret said. He took his pipe from his pocket, turned it once in his palm, and returned it. "Where did you find Mademoiselle Bernard?" "In here," Darras said. "On the floor by the chair. I heard a sound, as though something had tapped the table. I was in the kitchen. My wife was seeing to the bread." Madame Darras lifted her chin. "I called up to her first, but there was no answer. We thought, well, you never know, so we came down." "You did not call for a doctor," Maigret observed. No reproach in his tone. If anything, a mild curiosity, as if remarking on someone who takes his umbrella out after the rain has stopped. "She said it was not necessary," Madame Darras said quickly, with a glance that could have been at her husband or at Lisa. "She woke at once, it seemed. And there was tea—" Her sentence trailed off, as if the tea itself had objected to being mentioned. Maigret turned to the sideboard, where a brown teapot with a nickel-plated handle sat beside a sugar bowl with cubes half melted in their own dampness. He lifted the lid of the pot. A leaf clung to the underside, and there was still warmth inside. He did not look at his watch. Time in such rooms moved by the temperature of water, the settling of a spoon, the rate at which a wet mark darkened wood. "How many cups?" he asked. Madame Darras blinked. "2. There are always 2 in the parlour, for tenants to receive a friend, you know." "Yes," he said softly. "And the saucers?" She hesitated, then fetched a draw breath. "I don't know. There was one on the table, and I didn't see another. I wiped a spill." His eyes lowered to the faint crescent on the floorboards near the chair. It was not a spill precisely, but the outline where the curve of a cup had lain for a moment in a small lake, then been lifted too quickly. He thought of a hand that changes its mind halfway through a gesture. "Mademoiselle Bernard," he said, "you were receiving someone?" She looked at the broken cup before she looked at him. It was nothing important. "Nothing important often comes with tea," he said, an edge of humour that did not ask to be noticed. A long second passed. Outside, a car hissed along wet stone. In the kitchen, a tap was turned and then turned back, as if water itself had intruded. "I asked Madame if I might use the parlour," Lise said. "It is warmer than my room. I was waiting for a colleague." "From the import firm," Maigret said. She did not answer. He did not repeat himself. "Tell me about the cup," he said instead. She touched her hair, as though the cup might be hidden there. "It broke when I fell, I suppose." "It isn't one from the set," he murmured. "This one is older. The porcelain is thinner." Madame Darras found her courage. "It is from my mother's set. I keep it in the cupboard, not on the sideboard. For Sundays. I did not put it out." Darras made a small noise in his throat, the kind men make when they prefer to keep their houses free of drama. He shifted his weight, and the floorboard remembered his fondness for quiet. "Who opened the cupboard?" Maigret asked in the same tone he might have used to ask the time. No one spoke. A draught moved the lace on the lamp. Somewhere, 2 floors up, a wireless crackled into a waltz, and then out again, as if embarrassed to have chosen cheerfulness on a Monday evening. "Mademoiselle?" he prompted without raising his voice. She set the intact cup down with care. It made the smallest sound against wood, like a word said under a breath. "I did," she said. "I thought it would be nicer." "For your colleague?" "Yes. You were expecting someone particular then?" Her mouth made the shape of a denial and then did not use it. She lifted her eyes to his, and in them he saw not defiance, not guilt, but a modest irritation with herself for having mismanaged something simple. She had arranged an encounter, and it had not gone to plan, and in her economy of emotion that was worse than wrongdoing. "Did he come?" Maigret asked, using the pronoun deliberately, as if by chance. She did not object to it. "He was late," she said. "So late that he has not yet arrived." The corner of her mouth twitched. Not a smile, the opposite. "Perhaps. And in the meantime, you fainted." "I told you I stood up too quickly." He let that be, turning instead to the window. The latch was slightly askew, the kind of thing a caretaker notices and decides to postpone until spring. He put his finger to the wood. It was cool, but not wet. The parlour had not been aired. The smell of tea and the faint sour of old fruit were turned inward, not diluted by fresh air. He looked at her shoes. They were clean, though the streets had been damp all day. He filed that away with the patience of a man collecting buttons in a jar without a plan for them. "Who else lives here?" he asked, turning to Darras. "We have 4 tenants besides Mademoiselle Bernard," Darras said, counting them with a forefinger that grew surer as it moved. "Monsieur Chabot, a commercial traveller. He is on the 3rd floor front, but he is away this week. Troy, I think. Madame Prévost, a widow who keeps to herself, 2nd floor front. A student, Roussel, on the top floor, always going out at odd hours. And Monsieur Desbois, who works nights at the postal exchange, 1st floor back. And this evening, Madame Prévost is in. You can hear her radio sometimes. Desbois left at 6. The student came in, then went out again, I think. He is light on his feet. You don't always hear him." Maigret nodded, as though these names were places on a map he already knew. He let the silence thicken until it was almost impolite, then thinned it with a simple question. "Does your colleague have a name, Mademoiselle Bernard?" She folded her hands on the table like a schoolgirl determined not to fidget. "He is called Morel. First name." "I do not know it," she said too quickly, and then, with a small defeated honesty, André. Darras looked at his wife. The look had nothing to do with André Morel and everything to do with the trouble that follows strangers into a house. Madame Darras returned it with a pursed mouth that said she had known from the moment of the telephone call that the evening was already beyond repair. Have you known Monsieur Morel long? 2 months. He comes to the office sometimes. He helps the comptroller with deliveries. He asked me to. I invited him because he said he was cold. Cold, Maigret repeated, as if tasting the word for its flavour rather than its sense. He picked up the 2 broken pieces at last, turned them over, then placed them gently back where they had lain. The break was clean, a diagonal fracture as neat as if done by a wire. The handle had not snapped. Cups do not break like that, falling from a low table onto wood. They chip, they bruise, they lose an ear. This one had been pressed, not dropped. Did Monsieur Morel know the cupboard? He asked lightly, almost idly. Would he have known where the good cups were kept if he had wished to impress you? I took the cup, she said with a shade of irritation. I said so. Yes, he said. You did. He could hear, clearer now, the radio upstairs. A male voice announced the time, and in the kitchen, Madame Darras clicked her tongue and moved a pan a few centimetres to the left. Darras breathed out through his nose. The house had resumed its ordinary rhythms around this oddity, as the sea resumes its shape around a rock. May I see your room? Maigret asked. It was not a request that needed permission, but he made it one. It allowed Madame Darras to lead. She smoothed her apron, nodded, and took a lamp from the sideboard. The stair smelled of dust that had not become mould because the window at the landing was opened for 5 minutes every morning. On the second floor, a threadbare runner kept the boards from complaining. Madame Prévost's radio was a polite murmur behind a door whose key had not been turned in 5 years because there was no one to visit. Lisa's room was as she had suggested. Small, at the back, with a window onto a courtyard where a bicycle under a tarpaulin had been forgotten by someone who had left in summer and not returned by winter. The bed was neatly made. A black coat hung from a nail. On the washstand, a small bottle of aspirin stood beside a comb and a pin tray. On the chair, a handbag with its flap closed but not fastened, like a mouth about to say something, and then thinking better of it. He did not open the bag. He looked at the shoes lined up beneath the chair. 2 pairs, one with the leather softened by rain and rezels, the other newer, stiff at the heel. He touched the sleeve of the coat and found it cool, not damp. He went to the window and ran his thumb along the inner sill, a dust line, undisturbed. You felt faint downstairs, he said as if to himself. I told you. Yes. He nodded. You have aspirin. She made a small, helpless little sound, half irritation, half surrender. My head aches when the weather is like this. Mine too, he said pleasantly, and she almost smiled, which was the point. You expected André Morel at what time? 5:30. She glanced at the clock on the mantel. It had stopped at 4:20 for months, but people still looked at it by habit. He is often late, she added, either to explain Morel or to blame him for being the kind of man who attends to nothing on time. Did you write to him? Telephone? How did he know to come here? He came to the office Friday. We spoke in the doorway. I told him. She stopped, and when she continued, her voice was lower. I told him I would not meet him near work. There are eyes there. He said here would do. He said it would be warmer. Warmer. Again that word which in other houses belonged to blankets and husbands, and in this one belonged to a back parlour with a lamp too yellow for the wallpaper. He turned, looked once more around the room, then at her. You did not go out after lunch today, Mademoiselle Bernard. She blinked. No. The soles of your shoes are clean, and there is no third coat for the rain. He raised a hand, as if to forestall her objection. It is of no importance, he added, and meant it. He was not interested in catching her in an error. He was interested in seeing how she carried it. They went back down. At the bend in the stairs, he paused and looked toward the first-floor landing, where a door stood only just closed, as if someone had pressed it to, without the latch entirely kissing the strike. Behind it, there was a smell of tobacco, a kind smoked by men who must keep their hands busy at night to stay awake. Débois. Working nights, the landlady had said. But the night had not yet begun. In the parlour, the 2 pieces of the cup lay where he had left them. Rain ticked more decisively now on the window, as if choosing to be rain after all that hesitation. The teapot's warmth had gone. Madame d'Arras, hands folded, looked at him the way women look at a man who has been in their kitchen and left the pan where he found it. "Inspector," she ventured, using the word with a certain relief. "Is it a police matter?" "I don't know yet," he answered. He put his overcoat back on, drew the scarf close. "It may be nothing. It has the smell of something. But sometimes the smell is from the house and not from the thing itself." He looked at Lisa. "If Monsieur Morel comes, will you tell him I would like a word? Nothing formal. Here would be fine." She nodded, her face carefully composed into the expression of a woman who is grateful to be told what to do. "And, madame," he said to the landlady, "it would be kind if you did not wash these pieces tonight." "The cup." She was shocked. "But it's broken." "Yes, broken things have their uses." He stepped into the hall. On the coat pegs hung a man's hat that did not belong to Darras. Not a traveller's hat, not a student's cap, but the soft felt preferred by men who stand under awnings and do not like the rain. He looked at it for a beat longer than politeness allowed, and then he opened the door. The street air touched his cheeks like a cloth from the icebox. He did not hurry away. He stood under the meagre shelter and filled his pipe. Across the street, a boy in a blue apron dragged in a crate of bottles. The clink seemed very far away. He drew on the pipe, felt the smoke spread in his chest, and looked up at the second-floor windows, where lace blew a centimetre and settled again. It was early yet. He would walk. There was a cafe on the corner where he could sit with a beer and look at the door of the boarding house as if he were looking at nothing at all. If Morel had the habit of being late, he also might have the habit of arriving all at once. And if he did not, there were other rhythms to listen to. The steps of men who work nights, a student's light feet, a widow's radio sighing into a waltz. The cup had broken in a way cups do not break. That was either a clumsy lie or a careful truth. Between the two, somewhere in the smell of old fruit and wet wool, the evening would make its choice. The cafe smelled of yeast and damp wool. The glass of beer came in its own time, a thumb's width of foam riding the lip like a small white hat. Maigret sat with his elbows loosely on the marble, not hunched, not relaxed, the way a man sits when he intends to be in no one's way, and yet notices everything. Through the window, he could see the boarding house door, a rectangle of mustard paint in a wall the colour of dishwater. Light pooled on the wet street and broke when cars slid past. Nothing happened for a while, which was often how things began. The boy in the blue apron stacked his bottles inside and wiped the sill with a grey rag that had once, long ago, been a shirt. A woman carried an umbrella like a flag of surrender. A tram bell sounded 2 streets away, and the sound folded itself into the rain. At 10 minutes to 7, the first-floor door in the boarding house opened just enough for a man to slip out sideways. He wore a cap with the visor pulled low and carried a small canvas satchel. He locked the door behind him with the habitual quiet of someone used to leaving others asleep. He paused under the awning to light a cigarette. The flame writhed in the breeze and then held still. He cupped it with a hand that was square, the nails cut too close. He did not look up at the second-floor windows. He threw the match into the gutter, where it hissed like a remark and went out, and then he walked away toward the boulevard, his steps neat and unhurried. Desbois going to the post office. Maigret watched the trail of smoke drift behind him, like a string let loose from a parcel. He drew on his pipe and let it go out. He had lit it to have something to do with his hands, and then found he did not need to do anything with them after all. At 1:15, a young man came along at a half run, the way students run when they are late to everything and do not much mind. A slim figure, hair that pushed against the rain like a plant, a scarf in a colour chosen by someone who was not his mother. He slipped through the boarding house door with a sideways glance that scanned the street without seeing it. The door closed. The lace curtain, 2 floors up, lifted and fell. The beer had gone flat. It still tasted of a kind of patience. The waiter, broad-shouldered, wiped the next table and nodded to him with the mild respect given to men who are regulars somewhere else but known everywhere. When he brought the cheque, he let his eyes follow Maigret's to the boarding house. "Not much to look at," he said conversationally. His voice had that Parisian neutrality that is not indifference but the habit of keeping one's own counsel. "Few things are," Maigret murmured. When he stepped back into the street, the rain was a fine mist now, as if the sky had decided to breathe rather than weep. He crossed without hurrying and stood again under the ridiculous little bulb above the mustard door. The hat still hung on the peg in the hall where he had seen it. The light gave the felt a tired sheen. The smell inside was the same: tea, wool, and something sour. From the kitchen came a soft clink, as if a spoon had tapped, porcelain, and regretted it. Madame Darras looked up with a face that had spent the last half hour thinking of the broken cup and of the inspector who had told her not to tidy it away. She had not disobeyed. Obeying had made her uneasy. "Inspector," she said quietly, "shall I make you a coffee? It is nothing, but it warms." "Another time," he said. "I'll not be in the way." "You never are," she lied with good manners and wiped an imaginary crumb from the cloth. He stood in the hallway and listened. In the first-floor back room, a gap of silence that belonged to a locked door. On the second floor, the faint rustle that meant a woman sitting back down after standing to peer at the street. A floor above, a light step moving across a room with music in it. On the third floor, nothing at all. Travellers leave rooms that sound like the rooms of the dead. "Does Monsieur Desbois always go out at this time?" he asked. "Yes," she said, surprised he had the name and not surprised he knew the hour. "He is punctual. He says it is the only respect a man can afford without spending." "And Monsieur Roussel?" He used the student's name as if he were recalling a recipe. "He has returned." "For a moment," she said, and then made the face of a woman who knows that a young man's comings and goings are not to be counted as serious matters. He looked again at the hat. "Whose is this?" She frowned. It is not Alain's. He has a brown one, more stiff. Perhaps—" She stopped. "It could be Monsieur Morel's," she said, and the admission seemed to lower the temperature of the hallway a degree. "He came by once. He left it. He said he would collect it." "When?" She thought. The act took time because it required her to go into a part of memory where she kept receipts and spoons, and the hat did not belong there. "A week. 10 days. He has not collected it." It was not a question. She shook her head. There was the smallest movement of satisfaction in it, as if the uncollected hat had been a proof of her earlier discouragement, and she had been right to be suspicious of it. "Does he have a moustache?" Maigret asked, and she looked at him as if he had asked whether the hat minded the rain. "I do not know," she said, recovering herself. He is the sort who looks at his shoes when he speaks. He is thin in the face." "André Morel," he repeated, letting the name rest in his mouth. He stepped into the parlour. The 2 pieces lay where he had left them. Nobody had had the courage to set them aside, and nobody the courage to fix them in place. On the table, the intact cup had left a ring on its saucer that had begun to dry from the outside in, leaving a darker halo. He touched the edge of the table with the back of his knuckles, and then drew a small circle on the surface with his thumb, a man's absent-mindedness that carried more inquiry than most men's questions. "Inspector?" came a voice from the stairs. It was thin, the voice of a man who has learned to raise it without strengthening it. "Roussel," The student hovered on the half landing like a bird that had come the wrong way. Maigret went to the foot of the stairs and looked up. The young man's scarf had a thread pulled in it. His eyes were bright from haste or from youth. "You are the student," Maigret said, and the student nodded, relieved to have been defined. "I saw you from the window," Roussel said. Madame said, "Well, we all know who you are. Has something happened?" "Someone felt faint," Maigret said evenly. "We are all allowed that much." Roussel's eyes flicked toward the parlour and back. He wanted to ask and did not want to be asked. "I have class at 8, he offered, as if this were an alibi for whatever a man might suspect him of. "Then you will be late," Maigret said gently, and Roussel smiled in spite of himself, as if he had been forgiven something he had not done. From the second-floor back door, a soft step, and Lisa stood with her hand on the banister, not coming down and not going up. She had changed nothing. The neat hair, the calm mouth, the coat that would have been too thin if she had planned to go out in it. Her eyes measured the hallway, as if it had been slightly rearranged while she was in her room. "Has he come?" she asked, and no one needed to ask who he was. "No," Maigret said. "There is his hat." Her mouth made that small movement again, the one that was not a smile. "He is careless." "Perhaps he has 2 hats," Roussel suggested. "Or none," Madame Darras said, unable to leave the simple truth alone. "Some men borrow warmth and forget to bring it back." There was no spite in it, only the economy of a woman counting the cost of small disruptions to a house. "Would you know him if you saw him from the street?" Maigret asked Lise. She hesitated. "He walks as if he is avoiding puddles," she said finally, "even in dry weather." It was not much, and it was everything. Men who avoid puddles avoid other things too. They choose the edges of carpets, the shadow under awnings, the words that cost least. "Inspector," came another voice from the front, dry and patient as sand. A uniformed constable stood at the door, his shoulders bringing with them a little of the outside. Behind him, a figure in a wrinkled raincoat peered over his shoulder and then made a face of disappointment at the plainness of the scene. "Ah," the figure said, stepping in uninvited. "I was told you were taking the air in the rain, Chief Inspector. I said, that would be typical." Lognon, of course, with the look of a man perpetually cheated of heroics. Maigret did not smile. "Evening, Lognon." "Is this one of your impressions?" Lognon asked, hanging his hat on the peg directly beneath the abandoned felt, and then noticing it with irritation. "What is it this time? A cup that fell upwards." "A cup that broke neatly," Maigret said. "We are waiting for a man who walks as if puddles are a moral question." Lognon sniffed, as if to dismiss the poetry. "Shall I send a man to fetch him from the canal? These import clerks keep early hours, if they keep any at all." "Not yet," Maigret said. He looked at Madame Darras. "Do you put your garbage out at 7, Madame?" Her eyes widened at the strangeness of the query, then narrowed with certainty. "At past. Alain takes it down. The collector comes at 8 on Mondays." "Good." He turned back to the parlour, to the table, to the faint crescent on the floor that had dried just enough to be less than a stain and more than a memory. He moved a chair a few centimetres, as if to make room for the idea that had been standing too close to the wall. "Lognon," he said, without looking at him. "Walk to the end of the street and back. See if there is a man with no hat who tries not to wet his shoes. If he asks you for a light, ask him if he prefers cornflowers or roses." Lognon opened his mouth, closed it, and went out in search of ridicule or obedience, he did not know which. Maigret waited. He put his hands into the pockets of his overcoat and felt the folded paper bag there, the slice of apple tart he had neglected. He took it out, held it, and then put it back, a private treaty with the evening. At 25 past, Alain Darras came from the kitchen with a tin pail lined with newspaper. He carried it as men do who have carried such things so often that their hands know the weight without telling their wrists. He avoided meeting Maigret's eye and headed for the door. "One moment," Maigret said almost apologetically. "May I?" Darras frowned, because a man's garbage is his last privacy, but he set the pail down and stepped back. Maigret bent, not caring for the posture but caring for the thing itself, and stirred the top layer with 2 fingers. There were carrot peelings, a fish head with one eye clouded, a paper bag damp with tea leaves. Under that, something smooth and white. He lifted it. A saucer, unbroken, with a spray of blue cornflowers. "It was in the sink," Madame Darras blurted, her cheeks colouring as if accused of thrift. "I thought it was dirty. I put it with the others." "With the others?" Maigret repeated softly. He turned the saucer over. On the underside, a small chip at the rim that matched no fresh break. He looked at the table. There was a saucer there, holding the ring of drying tea, with roses round its edge. He placed the cornflower saucer back in the pail, as carefully as if it had been a bird he was returning to a nest. "Thank you," he said, and meant it. The door opened before Lognon could return. A man stood there with rain on his shoulders, but not on his shoes. He had the patient, slightly pinched face of an office that refuses to heat the corridor. He saw the inspector, saw the women, saw the hat on the peg, and his features arranged themselves into the neutrality of someone who has trained them for such moments. "Madame," he said, making a small bow to the landlady. "Mademoiselle." To Lise. He did not look at the broken cup on the table, and therefore had seen it. "Monsieur Morel," Maigret said without question or introduction. The man did not deny it. He took 2 steps into the hallway and took off no hat. His eyes went to the peg where his had hung a week or 10 days, and then away again. A shiver of recognition that he ironed flat. "I was delayed," he said. "The canal. There was a barge. It is nothing." "Nothing often comes with tea," Maigret said, and saw Lisa's mouth do that small movement that was not a smile. He stepped aside. "Shall we all go in from the rain?" Morel stepped into the parlour, as if it were a waiting room, in which he had been made to sit before, and found neither comfort nor danger there. His coat, though speckled with rain at the shoulders, was dry at the hem. His shoes, as Maigret had noticed from the doorway, carried no wet grit from the street. He removed the coat slowly, folded it over the back of a chair without being asked, and placed himself at one end of the table, opposite the broken cup. Lisa's eyes met his briefly, not in greeting, but in the measured way one looks at a clock whose hands have stopped but still confirm the time you suspected. She had not moved from her chair. Her hands remained on the saucer before her, fingertips resting lightly on its edge. Maigret did not sit immediately. He lit his pipe, tamped it once, and let the first pull fill the air with a curl of smoke that wandered toward Morel and dissolved before it reached him. He leaned one hip against the sideboard, hands in his coat pockets. "You know Mademoiselle Bernard," he said, his tone as mild as if he were confirming a baker's acquaintance with flour. "Of course," Morel replied. His voice was steady, neither friendly nor guarded. "We work nearby. You expected to see her here this evening?" Morel's eyes flicked to Lisa, then back. "Yes, I was delayed." Maigret nodded, as if the word itself might carry weight in another room. "And you came in through the door?" Morel gave a faint, uncertain smile. "Yes." "No back entrance?" "No." Madame Darras cleared her throat from the doorway. "The back door is locked at 5. Alain sees to it." Maigret acknowledged her with the briefest tilt of his head. "So," he said, "you arrived just now." But the tea was made earlier. Morel looked at the pot, at the cooling liquid inside. "It seems so." "You prefer cornflowers or roses?" It was asked without warning, without context. Morel's gaze wavered for the first time. "I don't know. Cornflowers, perhaps." Maigret's eyes stayed on him. "It's an unusual choice in this house," he said. The cornflower. Cups are kept in a cupboard, locked. That's nothing to do with me, Morel said. A touch faster now, his hands on the table moving fractionally toward each other, then apart. And yet one was used today, Maigret continued. And broken. Silence lengthened. Outside, a passing truck splashed through a puddle, the sound trailing away like an unfinished remark. I didn't touch it, Morel said at last. I came here because… He stopped, rearranged his words. Because it was cold. Yes, Maigret murmured. Cold. He looked at Lise. You told me the same. Her eyes did not leave Morel's. I asked him here, she said, each word weighed. To talk, Morel added quickly, almost overlapping her. About what? Maigret's voice was calm, without challenge. Lise's lips pressed together. Morel looked at his hands. A matter at work, he said. It's private. Private from your employer? From everyone. And you needed tea for that, Maigret said, letting the words settle like sediment in water. Neither answered. Madame Darras shifted her weight in the doorway, the boards beneath her foot making a faint groan. You see, Maigret went on, tea tells you things, not the tea itself, the cups, the saucers, the way the pot is handled. A man who pours his own will often fill to the rim. A guest waits for the host to serve. Here, the cup was taken from the cupboard before the guest arrived, which means either the host intended something special, or the guest was here earlier. Morel straightened slightly, a shadow of defiance in the movement. I told you I wasn't. And yet your hat has been here a week, Maigret said mildly, as if correcting the time of a train. That was… Morel began, then broke off. He looked down. I forgot it. A week, Maigret repeated. In Paris, in winter. Most men don't forget a hat they wear every day, unless they have another. Morel's eyes rose to meet Maigret's. I don't like to be rushed, he said, his voice quieter. I've noticed, Maigret replied. Lognon reappeared in the doorway, his coat damp, his expression irritated at having been sent on an errand that had apparently resolved itself without him. He glanced at Morel, then at Maigret. Shall I… Not yet, Maigret said. Monsieur Morel is helping us with a question about crockery. Lognon's eyebrows rose, but he stayed in the doorway. Maigret moved away from the sideboard, circling the table with the slow steps of a man considering a picture hung slightly crooked. He stopped beside the broken cup. It broke cleanly, he said, his eyes on Morel. Not chipped, not shattered. That happens when a cup is pressed between two hands and twisted. That's absurd, Morel said quickly. Perhaps. Maigret's voice was softer now. But it is harder to press a cup that way when it is full. Easier when it is empty, which means it had been drunk from already. And yet the saucer was in the kitchen bin before the tea was finished. Strange. Morel's jaw tightened. Lisa's hands moved from her saucer to her lap. Shall I tell you what I think? Maigret asked, not waiting for agreement. I think there was a first meeting before the one you were expected for. Someone else was here. They used the cornflower cup, either because they were told to or because they knew where it was. Something was said, or done, that ended with that cup broken. The saucer went to the bin so that no one would see it, and the rest of the tea was poured into the rose cup for when you arrived. The silence that followed had weight to it. Morel's eyes had gone flat, not angry, but careful. Lisa's gaze had shifted, not away, but inward. That's all theory, of course, Maigret added, almost cheerfully. It may be the weather, making me imagine things. He turned to Madame Darras. Do you lock that cupboard every day? She nodded. Always. And the key? On a hook in the kitchen. Maigret looked at her husband, who had appeared behind her, wiping his hands again. Anyone can reach it? If they come through the kitchen, Alain Darras said. But why would they? Why indeed, Maigret said. He took up his coat from the peg, glanced at the hat beside it, and then replaced his coat without putting it on. He stepped closer to Morel, his shadow touching the man's sleeve. "You didn't come here to drink tea," he said, his voice almost a murmur. "You came to hear what had been decided before you arrived, and you already suspected it wouldn't be in your favor." Morel's eyes narrowed a fraction. "You don't know what you're talking about." Maigret nodded as if agreeing, then turned toward the door. "Perhaps not, but I'll know more when I find the person who left without saying goodbye, and I think they left by the back, before it was locked." He looked once at Lise, who had not moved since Morel's arrival. Her face was unreadable, but her hands, now folded in her lap, were pale at the knuckles. "I'll come by tomorrow," Maigret said to no one in particular. "Things have a way of settling in the night." He stepped into the hall, pulled on his coat, and felt the cool weight of the apple tart in his pocket. Outside, the mist had thickened again, softening the lamplight so that the street looked further away than it was. He walked without haste toward the corner cafe, thinking of the broken cup, the discarded saucer, and the man with dry shoes on a wet night. Some puzzles solved themselves if you left them in the right weather. Others needed a little turning, like a key in a cupboard lock. Tonight, he would let the rain do its work. Tomorrow, he would see what was left behind. He ate the apple tart at the kitchen table, late, with his coat still on, and his shoulders remembering the rain. Madame Maigret had left the light burning over the stove, and the cloth folded with its stripes aligned. She came in from the other room, wiping her hands on a towel, as if she had been interrupted by nothing more urgent than time. "You went out," she said, not a question. "A lodging house near the canal," he answered. "A woman fainted over tea. A cup broke." She paused with the towel caught between her palms. "How did it break?" "Cleanly," he said. "Twisted, not dropped." She made a small sound that might have been agreement. She set a plate in front of him, the tart already on it, and then refolded the towel because it had lost its shape in her hands. "People break things that way when they want to stop hearing," she said. "A plate, a cup. If someone says something you will not have in your house, your fingers do it before your tongue." He considered that, the way a man considers the temperature of water before putting his hand in. "There were 2 cups," he said. "Roses on one, cornflowers on the other. The cornflower saucer was in the bin." She poured coffee. "Landladies notice their good cups," she murmured. "They do not notice their saucers until after supper. A saucer goes missing first, because it is easier to hide." He smiled, not at her wisdom, but at the fact that it placed itself gently where he could use it. "A man came without a hat," he said. "His hat has been hanging there for a week." She looked at him then, fully, the way a wife looks when she has chosen to say a thing that sounds like nothing. "A man who forgets his hat wants a reason to return," she said. "Or he wants someone to look at the peg." He ate the tart. It had cooled just enough. The apple was soft, the pastry a compromise between crispness and the kitchen's damp. In the other room, the clock gave a tired little cough before deciding not to strike. They did not speak after that. He smoked his pipe in the doorway while she tidied, and when he put out the last inch of tobacco, he had the shape of something in his mind. Not the thing itself, but the outline it would take if given the right light. Morning was not so much a change of weather as a change of thought. The drizzle persisted, a patient hand on the city's brow. He left early, walked without haste, and let the streets remind him that most lives had already begun before he met them. In the grey hour when night workers come home with their faces folded in on themselves, the postal exchange spilled men with the same shoulders into the square. Desbois came out among them, a cigarette already between his lips, as if he had been smoking all night in his head, and had only now given his hands permission to join. "You have been awake a long time," Maigret said, falling into step. "I prefer it," Desbois replied, not surprised to find the inspector beside him. His voice was roughened by hours of sorting other people's words. "You want to ask about last night?" "I want to ask about habit," Maigret said. "You leave at 6. "Most nights," Desbois said. "Yesterday, a bit earlier. I went down for a smoke and found I had left my scarf. Winter makes a man forget his neck. You went back, Maigret said, and he did not make it a question. For a minute. The back door was not yet locked. Madame was in the kitchen, complaining to the kettle. There was talking in the parlour, the kind of talking that is nearly whispering, but doesn't want to be. I did not look. A man with my hours learns not to see other people's business. The cupboard key. Desbois made a face that acknowledged the exactness of the question. On its hook. It always is. Madame puts it there so she can scold whoever touches it. That way she need not lock the cupboard. Did you see anyone else on the stairs? A shadow, he said. Light feet. The boy upstairs, perhaps. Or someone who did not wish to be heavy. He stubbed his cigarette against the stone and put the butt in his pocket. A man careful even with waste. There was a smell, he added, and surprised himself by having kept it to say, fruit that had been kept too long. Apples, Maigret said without thinking, and then shook his head. No. Pears, Desbois decided. A single one, gone soft where it touched the dish. They walked a few paces more. The exchange behind them made the little sounds buildings make when people stop talking inside them. I will sleep, Desbois said, with the dignity of men who justify sleep by their labour. If you need me, knock loud. Near the canal, the import office was 3 rooms with 2 names on the door and more paper than goods. Men in hats went in and out as if the corridor were colder than the rain. The comptroller, Huret, was a square man who kept his pen exactly between his fingers and his temper exactly behind his teeth. Morel? He said, with the relief of a man being asked about a lesser nuisance. He runs errands. If you tell him to go from A to B, he arrives at B cleaner than when he left A. He has the gift for avoiding the world. Is he trusted? In the way we trust a man with nothing to do but be useful, Huret replied. We have had small discrepancies, not theft, he said quickly, as if the word itself might tarnish his ledgers. Loose ends, petty cash that does not balance on a Tuesday and does again on Thursday after somebody remembers a receipt. Mademoiselle Bernard is good with accounts. She never forgets a number. She remembers people less. He looked up. Why do you ask? Because yesterday she expected Morel, Maigret said, and then did not add the rest. He was looking at the coat rack. Among the dull browns and blacks hung a scarf in a thin blue that remembered the sea incorrectly. It matched no one in the room. We have a typist here twice a week, Huret offered, trying to be helpful. From the agency. She is young. Men notice young women and forget their hats. It makes for drafts. Has Morel other work? He has the look of a man who is most comfortable between 2 places, Huret said dryly. He is here until we want him somewhere else. If he has something of his own, he keeps it in the lining. Outside, the canal was the colour of pewter. Barges slept as barges do, with a patience older than the city. He watched water take a shape and then lose it. A bargewoman lifted a child to see a dog on the towpath. The child's laughter did not travel in the damp air, and yet the movement of her mouth pleased him. He went back to the lodging house by a different street, letting his feet pick their remembering. In the hallway, the same hat hung where it had been, more tired for having been seen. Madame Darras was polishing a spoon, as if it were older than it was. You are early, she said, which meant she had expected him. Do I disturb? No, she said. There is no soup to spoil. He lifted the hat from the peg. It had the weight of a hat that had been rained on sometime in autumn and not properly dried after. In the band, where a man keeps nothing, there was a small card folded once. He did not open it in the hallway. He put the hat back the way it had been and let his fingers rest on the brim a heartbeat too long. Madame Prévost is in, he asked. She is always in, unless she is out, Madame said, but she prefers to be in, because out keeps no one company. He climbed to the 2nd floor. The widow opened her door before he knocked, as if she had been listening to the approach and was glad to have the decision made for her. She was a woman of the age that takes the shape of the chair one uses most. Her eyes were brighter than the rest of her. You shook my house last night, she said without rancor. With your standing in the doorway. Pardon. It is good to have someone stand, she said. People nowadays sit on the edge of chairs and tell lies. He looked at the radio with its cloth thrown over it. You heard something. Tea, she said at once. The small clatter of spoons that wish to be gentler than they are. A man who speaks as if he is being careful with his words. And a woman who is not young because she does not hurry. Not the girl from the back. Another. She wears a perfume that admits pears and denies flowers. What did she say? She said, "It cannot be here." He said, "Where then?" She said, "You must take it back where it belongs." And then there was the sound of porcelain refusing to listen. And the time. She glanced at the mantel where a clock kept someone else's hour. 5:30 by my neighbour's boots going down the front stairs, she said. He is punctual. He has the feet of an honest man. Des Bois, Maigret said. No, she said. Her certainty was comfortable. He walks like a man who has no time to spare for anyone's eyes. This was the student. He runs even when he is walking, because youth is a fire that smokes. He thanked her. On the landing, he stood a moment and let the sentences square themselves. A woman not young, pears in the air, a phrase about taking something back. The first break in the cup at 5:30, before the back door was locked, while the key hung on its hook so that it could be blamed if necessary. Roussel, the student, had passed at that hour, leaving his light feet for the house to interpret. At the bottom of the stairs, he opened the hat's tucked card. It was a receipt from a cloakroom, 5 francs paid, dated a week ago. The name of the cinema was stamped in purple and had bled when wet. The ticket number had been written in pencil by someone who pressed too hard. He showed it to Madame Darras without comment. She read it with the solemnity of women who know that paper will always be stronger than cloth. There is a cinema on the boulevard, she said. It is where girls go in the afternoon when they are not expected. Men go at night when they are not expected to be at home. Who put this in his hatband? He asked. She lifted her shoulders and let them fall. Men who carry nothing must keep something somewhere, she said. If not in their pockets, then in their hats. If not in their hats, then in their mouths. He put the card back. Not because it needed to be there, but because leaving it somewhere else would have made the hallway feel rearranged, and households notice that sort of thing before they notice the truth. In the parlour, Lisa was seated as if she had never left the chair, the way people sit in their thoughts when their bodies go upstairs and down. She had no coat now. Her hands were empty. You had a visitor before Monsieur Morel, he said, not accusing, not asking. Her mouth did that small movement, which was not a smile and not a refusal. Yes, she said. I had to say a thing to someone who would not hear it if I wrote it. A woman, he said. A woman, she agreed. Older. She is not old, Lisa said, with the justice of youth that refuses to allot age to anyone who has not asked for it. She has lived longer. Why did you use the cornflower cup? Lisa's eyes flicked to the sideboard. Because she would notice, she said simply. If I used the other, she would think I had learned nothing. Learned what? That one should not have such things where men can touch them, she said, flushing slightly, and then added defensively. It is a superstition. Superstitions have their uses, he said. What did she ask you to take back? Lisa's hands resting on the table tightened until the knuckles paled. A number, she said. A small number on a piece of paper that makes everything add up wrongly in someone else's book and rightly in mine. And you refused. I told her it cannot be. Here, she said, and he heard the echo as Madame Prévost had. Not in a house like this. Not where people carry their troubles up and down stairs. I told her to take it back where it belongs. And then the cup broke. She pressed it, Lise said, and there was a quick flicker of pity in her eyes that surprised him. She is not cruel. She is only someone who has no other way to stop a thing once it is moving. Her name? Lise hesitated so long that the rain might have begun again and ended. "Madame Huret," she said at last, low enough that the name would not go as far as the kitchen. The comptroller's wife. He felt no satisfaction. Only the alignment of details making a shape that could now be walked around. He said nothing for a while. The street hissed under an invisible car. Somewhere on the top floor, a young man's feet argued with the silence. "You will bring me the paper," he said gently. "Not to the office. Here, in the parlor with the lamp and the cheap wallpaper. It will be warm enough." She nodded, once, as if the decision had been waiting on the table beside the broken cup and was relieved to be chosen. He left her there with the cornflowers and the roses. And in the hall, he lifted the hat again, felt the damp memory in its felt, and thought of the cloakroom stub tucked like a breath against the band. Madame Maigret's voice came back to him. Not her words, but the manner of them, the way domestic truths slide under the door and settle without knocking. At the door he met Lognon coming in, his shoulders argumentative with the weather. "You have the look," Lognon said, suspicious of conclusions he had not watched being built. "What is it? A grand scandal? A conspiracy of cups?" "Less," Maigret said, "and more." He put on his own hat, the brim already resigned to the rain. "A woman who wants to return something to where it belongs. A man who forgets his hat to have a reason to be remembered. A number that makes love look like arithmetic." Lognon made a face. "You and your poetry." "Go to the cinema on the boulevard," Maigret said, not unkindly. "Ask who keeps the cloakroom on Tuesdays. Ask them who left a hat a week ago and did not come back for the stub because someone else kept it safe." "And then?" Lognon demanded. "Then," Maigret said, stepping into the wet air that made the day smell like stone and bread, "we will see who has been careful with their shoes and careless with their life." The Boulevard Cinema had not yet decided whether it was open or merely rehearsing the idea. A boy with sleeves pushed to his elbows swept a tide of cigarette ends into a neat hill and then away again. Posters on the wall insisted that love could be resolved in 90 minutes if one chose the right song. Maigret did not go in. He stood in the vestibule where the air smelled of damp velvet and the sugar from last night's sweets. The cloakroom was a narrow recess opposite the staircase. A girl with round shoulders sat behind the hatch, carving an apple into very thin slices with a knife too large for the task. She had the patient look of someone whose job is to keep other people's belongings in mind. "Last Tuesday," he said, showing her the purple stamped stub in his palm. "Do you remember this number?" She looked at it and nodded without flourish, as if remembering were the easiest part of her day. "A hat," she said. "Soft felt. It had rain in it that made the band smell tired. Who left it?" She smiled the smallest smile. "Everyone leaves. The question is, who returns?" She tilted her head toward the staircase. He did not come back. A lady did. She said she had the stub for a friend. "Describe her." "She's the sort of woman who wears a coat you do not see until she takes it off." "Then you see it everywhere in the room," the girl said, pleased with the accuracy of her own thought. "She smells like pears and starch. She speaks to make sure the words do not run away from their meaning." "And the friend?" "A man who forgets his hat," she said. "I did not see him. But the way she touched the brim, it was not hers. It was like feeding a cat that will not love you." He pressed a franc into the space between the wood and his palm, and then took it away again. She would keep his face better without owing him for it. He thanked her and stepped back into the morning, which had brightened by deciding to be grey all at once. The import office was less busy than an hour ago. Men had dispersed to places where paper demanded to be signed in triplicate. Huret, the comptroller, had his jacket on the back of his chair and his braces in view. He looked like a man undressed only to the degree a moral code allowed. "Your wife," Maigret said without preamble, "went to a cinema last week to collect a hat for Monsieur Morel." Huret's pen tapped once against the desk. He did not look surprised. He looked affronted on behalf of order. "My wife goes to the cinema when the room is cold," he said. "It has heat and other people's problems. If she collected a hat, it is because the man who owns it is the kind who leaves it." "Does she know him?" Huret's mouth grew thinner. "She knows what I talk about at dinner. I mentioned your man in passing. He is the kind I do not hire, and sometimes must pay." "Your wife visited Mademoiselle Bernard yesterday at 5:30, Maigret said. "They drank tea." He watched the information land. It did not cause panic. It caused tidiness. Huret rearranged a pile of invoices by tapping them into perfect alignment. "My wife has notions," he said. "She takes an interest where interest is inexpensive. She thinks numbers can be adjusted in the same way as curtains. The window is always the same size, Inspector. It is the room that changes." He sat back. "If she troubled the girl, I regret it. She thinks she is helping me when she is only helping herself to the sense that she has acted." "What did she want taken back?" 500 francs, Huret said at once, deciding there was more dignity in naming it than in letting it be estimated. A parcel advance paid twice and not recorded the first time, because a man who collected it pretended to himself that he had not. He pretended again on Friday. "Yesterday my wife discovered that the second pretense had reached our dining table. She has a talent for finding what is not addressed to her." "Did you ask her to retrieve it?" "I asked her to leave it alone," he said tiredly. "That is not the same thing." "Who is the man?" "Morel," he said. "Who else?" "The boy runs between places. If he had to run between accounts, he would prefer to run where the numbers are further apart." "And the first pretense?" Maigret asked. Huret hesitated, then took the step that people take when they realize secrecy has become more work than truth. "Roussel," he said, "the student. He helps with messages and proofs. He is paid in small notes and large smiles. He took an advance once when his rent was larger than his month, and then repaid it by being available at inconvenient hours. I did not put it in the ledger because charity belongs in the human column, not the arithmetic." "Your wife disagreed," Maigret said. "My wife thinks charity is best when receipts are issued," he said, and gave a humorless little shrug. "She is not wrong. She is simply not kind." "Where is she now?" "At home," he said. "Where else would a woman go after making a mistake that she believes to be a correction?" He gave the address without asking why he should, and Maigret left him assembling his papers into a moral that would get him through the day. The Hurets lived in a street where the balconies hold up more flower boxes than flowers. The concierge looked up from her embroidery long enough to decide that he was not there to count her coal. The apartment door opened at the first ring with a decisiveness that suggested the person inside had been facing it. Madame Huret was the woman the cloakroom girl had described without knowing her name. The coat on the stand was ordinary. The dress beneath it carried its own weather. The pear scent was lighter in her own rooms, less a perfume than a habit of the air. Her face had been arranged for company and did not yet resent his rank. "Inspector, of course," she said. "Please come in. The house is cold. My husband thinks warmth is an extravagance for feelings." She led him to a salon where the furniture had been placed with squared elbows. On the mantel, a photograph showed a younger woman wearing the same set of shoulders. She poured coffee without asking if he would have any, and did not drink hers. "You saw the girl yesterday," he said. "I saw a young woman who believes that tidy accounts will produce a tidy life," she said. "It is an error I have committed and therefore recognize." "You asked her to return a number." "I asked her to help me repair a small tear before it became a seam," she said. "It was not her tear. She reminded me. She was right to. I am less often wrong than I am merely early." The cup broke. She looked at him for a heartbeat, surprised, and then not. "Yes," she said. "I broke it. I do not like the sound of porcelain that has ceased to answer. I thought the noise would interrupt our foolishness." "It did," Maigret said. "The saucer went into the bin." "Of course." She met his eyes without flinching. "I dislike seeing halves. It makes me think of promises. You collected a hat from a cinema cloakroom last week, he said, and watched the smallest colour lift into her cheeks. I did, she said, because I was foolish elsewhere too. Morel. She looked at the window. It is easy to pity a man who stands very still, she said. You think if you give him the right object, money, a hat, a word, he will begin to move. Sometimes he only learns that standing still brings offerings. Did he ask you for money? He asked me to be the sort of woman who could be asked for money, she said with a chilly accuracy that did not spare herself. My husband thinks in squares. I sometimes think in circles. Men who live by errands notice circles. They stand in the middle and watch you come round. 500 francs, Maigret said. She made a face. Less than the cost of a good carpet, and more than the pride I had set aside to avoid seeing my husband's face when he notices, she said. I went to the girl because she writes down what men try to forget. And what did you intend yesterday? To have her give me the paper with the number on it, she said. Then I would tear it up and swear to myself that something had been restored. She was right to refuse. The world is not a tablecloth you can shake. He let the silence move between them and then settle. And Morel. He would have come later to tell her that since I had been there, she must now be precisely as foolish toward him, she said. He thinks balances are moral rather than numerical. He believes that if one woman gives, he may ask another, and the world remains just. Do you know the student? He asked. Only as a blur on the stairs, she said. He has the pity of youth. He believes all troubles are temporary if one can run fast enough. You press the cup, he said again, softly, not as accusation, but as understanding. She smiled with weariness at the thing in her own hand. I did it because my mother did it once, she said. It is a family method of stopping words from becoming decisions. Did it work? I am speaking to you, she said dryly. So, no. He rose. She did not escort him to the door, which meant she considered him already, half gone. At the threshold, she said, not fully to him, Please do not make a scene of it. My husband's pride cannot afford the repairman. He nodded, and she looked relieved in the way of people who have asked too much and been given exactly enough. Back on the street, he felt the investigation tilt from a matter of cups and numbers toward the place where such things begin to smell of people. He walked to the canal without thinking about destination, and then turned because the water, being itself, had nothing to give him. At the boarding house, the hallway air had warmed with boiling cabbage. Madame Darras wiped the table as if gossip might leave grease. She pointed with her chin toward the parlour. Lisa sat with a folded paper under her hand, as if absorbing its creases into her palm. She offered it without ceremony. It was an office memo coupon, the kind torn from a pad with a serrated edge, a neat 500, written in a tight hand that could have been hers or anyone's who disliked flourish. On the reverse, in pencil, faint from having been rubbed against the pocket it had occupied, a single word. Tuesday. Roussel, she said. He brought it last week. He said it was nothing. He says that about many things. When something is nothing enough times, it becomes something. Where did he get it? Morel gave it to him, she said, because Morel does not like to carry anything that belongs to other people. It makes him feel responsible. He slipped the paper into his wallet, not because it proved anything, but because not taking it would have felt like refusing a chair to an old woman. Longyon came in, damp and triumphant, in a minor key. Your cinema, he said. The cloakroom girl remembers the lady and the hat and thinks virtue can be weighed in fruit. More interesting. The usher swears he saw Morel standing on the pavement last Tuesday with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the poster for a film that had nothing to do with him. He did not go in. He was waiting to be given something. A hat, Maigret said. A reason, Longyon said, pleased with himself. Good, Maigret said. He put a palm to the doorpost and felt the house vibrate with footsteps above. A student's, a widow's, the measured tread of a man who had slept the day and would carry the night on his shoulders. We will see them all together this evening, he added, almost to the wood. In the parlour, When men are tired, their lies sit down. He looked at the broken cup once more, its two pieces obediently failing to make a whole. The cornflower pattern would never touch itself again. There was a kind of mercy in that. Some things, once pressed, were better left apart. Evening settled in the house the way steam settles in a kitchen, slowly, finding corners first. The cabbage had been eaten. The smell of it stayed on the stair where the runner didn't quite meet the skirting. Alain Darras brought in the lamp with a new wick because he disliked the way half-light made people's faces look undecided. He set it on the parlour table, careful not to nudge the two clean halves of the cornflower cup. The broken porcelain gave the room a certain order, like a book open to the place where someone had stopped reading. One by one they came as if the house itself had exhaled them. Madame Prévost with her shawl, and her eyes already turned inward. Roussel with his scarf pulled too tight, as if his throat were trying to change its mind. Desbois shaved and neat, smelling faintly of soap and tobacco, ready for the night to begin again. Lise seated very straight, hands in her lap. Morel last, hatless, a man who had taught his hair to lie still. Maigret had not put his overcoat on a peg. He wore it, open, as if the question of staying or going were part of his presence. Lognon stood in the doorway, not in the room and not out of it, prepared to look offended if nothing required offence. "We will talk a little," Maigret said. "Not much." Houses remember how people talk in them. No one answered. He glanced at the clock that had never been made to tell this house's time, and decided to make it do so. 5:30, he said. "Yesterday." The back door open, the cupboard key on its hook. A visitor in the parlour before anyone else. Not a girl. He looked at Lisa. A woman whose perfume remembers pears. She asks for a paper with a number. She asks for it to be taken back where it belongs. It is refused. Madame Prévost's mouth softened in approval at being included without being addressed. "Yes," she murmured. "The cornflower cup is used," he went on mildly, "because the visitor notices such things. She breaks it when the talk becomes the sort that cannot be put back into words. The saucer," he nodded toward the kitchen, "is carried away among the ordinary washing so that the broken half will look like a single accident." Madame Darras, who had been hovering at the threshold with a cloth she did not need, coloured without being shamed. "I put it in the bin," she said, "because halves irritate me. It is not an offence." "No," he said, "it is what women do to keep a house from arguing with itself." He looked at Desbois. "You went down early. You saw a figure on the stairs. Light, Desbois agreed, like a cat that means well." Roussel flushed. He had the look of a boy who wants to declare his innocence before anyone thinks to accuse him. "I was late," he said. "Always. I heard talking. I did not look. It seemed—" He groped for a word that would let him keep his youth. "Private." "You smelled pears," Madame Prévost said, almost smug, and he nodded, curt and ashamed at needing her to say it. "At 7:20, Maigret said. Monsieur Morel arrives without a hat and without interest in the rain. He finds tea on the table and a clean cup ready with roses. He does not ask who was here before him, because he has learned that if one waits, the story will include one where convenient. He has practiced this." The words were said without disdain, as if describing a skill. Morel's gaze held, careful, respectful. "You make a great deal of not much," he said, and the evenness of his tone offered itself as proof. "A number written on a coupon is not much," Maigret agreed. "It buys a rent for a month or a quarrel for a year. It shows what someone intends to repay and what someone intends to forgive." He took the folded paper from his wallet and set it on the table beside the broken porcelain. It had the authority of things that have been carried. "You brought this, mademoiselle," he said to Lise, "because you are tired of being the place where other people put what does not belong to them." "It is the office's," she said, "not mine, not anyone's, if people will not say their names." "Names are heavy," Morel said with the faintest smile. "Some of us are not strong." Yet you are strong enough to stand in doorways until what you want is handed to you, Maigret said, almost kindly. The student shifted. He had been holding himself the way a boy holds a full glass. It was mine once, he said suddenly, the words stumbling over each other in their haste to stop. The advance. I told Huret. He let me repay it in errands. It is not a crime. No, Maigret said. It is not a crime to be poor, and it is not a virtue to write it down. It is only life. But when another man learns your errand has a pocket in it, he may try to use it. He turned to Morel. You gave him the coupon last week. You told him it was nothing. Morel's shoulders rose and fell, not a shrug, a breath. I asked him to keep it until Tuesday, he said. There is a girl at the cloakroom who asks questions if a man returns alone too often. A lady was to bring my hat. It did not concern him to know more. So the lady collects your hat because you have taught her pity, Maigret said. And the girl at the cloakroom remembers the smell because she has learned to keep people by their perfumes. The stub goes into your hatband, where a man who leaves his hat in other places keeps talismans. Morel looked down at his hands. They were very clean. You speak as if I planned a thing, he said. I never plan. I avoid. Puddles, Maigret said, and the smallest flicker of humour touched the landlady's mouth. The room had warmed a degree. The lamp's glass made a small circle on the table where the cornflowers would no longer meet. Maigret let silence collect, then thinned it with 2 words said toward the door rather than into the room. Madame Huret. She had been there for a minute already, standing in the hallway between Lognon and Madame Darras, who had offered her a towel she did not need. She stepped in without ceremony, the pear scent arriving a heartbeat before her. She did not sit. She did not remove her gloves. She looked at the cup on the table and let the corner of her mouth move in acknowledgement of what she had done and what it had said about her. My husband thinks I am at my sister's, she announced to no one in particular. It is tiresome always to be in the right room. You will be brief, Maigret said, as if granting her a favour he had not been asked for. I will be brief, she repeated. She regarded Morel with a politeness that fell short of kindness. I should apologise to you, she told Lisa, not looking at her. And I do. Not for coming, which I should not have done, but for thinking I could move numbers around like chairs and create space where there was none. You broke the cup, Lisa said, almost gently. I did, Madame Huret said, because there are times when speaking becomes a form of rudeness. Yesterday, Maigret said, you asked her to give you a paper. Today, the paper is here. It will go back through the proper hands, which is to say, the least clean ones. Huret's wife blinked, surprised by the mercy of that phrasing. I do not like scenes, she said. If there must be one, let it be in a room that has already seen worse. Who told you to go to the girl? He asked. She weighed the truth and found it lighter than pretense. He did, she said, the briefest glance at Morel. He suggested she kept ledgers for other people's feelings as well. I thought I might make an entry of my own. And what did he promise? That once the number was taken back, she said, everything would be simple. Simplicity is the lie I have always paid for most gladly. Morel opened his mouth and then closed it. His face had no drama in it. Only the fatigue of a man discovering that what he has been is more visible than what he hoped to do. Roussel made a small sound and then spoke over himself to keep from hearing it. I saw you on the stairs, he blurted to Madame Huret, his cheeks red, his eyes bright as if fevered by scruples. I pretended I did not. I did not want you to be seen. I thought that would be the kindest thing I did all year. It was kind, she said, not ungratefully. It was also useless. Kindness often is, when we have been foolish first. Desbois shifted his weight with the patience of men who have learned to be furniture in the rooms of other people's lives. There is work at night, he said into the room, not to anyone. It teaches you that what people carry is lighter if you do not take it from them. They will put it down when they are ready. This is ready, Maigret said. He put a hand, broad and impersonal, on the folded coupon and then on the broken cup, as if blessing and absolving both. Here is the order of things. The office will balance. It will do so without police paper if it can. The boy will not be virtuous about poverty. The man who avoids puddles will step in one and discover he is still himself. The lady will go home and be colder than her husband thinks a person can be without breaking. Madame Huret laughed once. It was not a happy sound, but it had relief in it. A sermon? She asked. A housekeeping note, he said, for a house that is not mine. He turned to Morel with the gentleness he reserved for men bereft of the energy to deceive themselves. If you have taken more than the number on that paper, he said, say so now, quietly, to me, in the hall. If you have not, understand that your way of being in rooms has made you look like a thief, even when you are only hungry. If you continue, it will not be a lodging house that calls me. It will be a man whose patience with shabbiness has run out. Morel's eyes moved to the hat on the peg, as if it could speak for him. He said nothing. He did not need to. The shape of the silence around him had all the words. And you, he said to Roussel, with equal softness, will go upstairs and write on a paper what you owe and what you can give each week until it is finished. You will keep it where the radio is. Once a week, you will look at it and forgive yourself for being young. The student nodded, almost eager with relief at being given a simple, measurable kindness disguised as punishment. He faced Madame Huret last, because she would understand that position in the order. If I do not come to your apartment tomorrow, he said, tell your husband yourself. Tell him you tried to be useful and instead discovered yourself. He will dislike it less if the sentence is yours. She drew a breath, then let it go. You ask a great deal for a man who dislikes scenes, she said, but the resistance had no weight. Very well. He stepped back. The lamp hummed faintly with heat. The rain had begun again, a more decided sound like rice on paper. In the kitchen, Madame Darras set out cups, the ordinary ones with roses, and said nothing about who would drink and who would not. The two halves of the cornflower cup lay between them on the table, polite and parted, having already told their truth. They did not disperse at once. People seldom do when a room has acquired a temperature. They lingered like steam after a kettle is taken off the hob, reluctant to admit that the talk had said what it needed to and no longer had any work to do. Madame Prévost folded her shawl twice before remembering she was meant to be wearing it. She put it back on as if to apologize to her shoulders. Desbois adjusted his cuffs and looked at the clock that never told the truth, as if asking it permission to leave. Roussel turned his scarf so the loose thread would not show, because youth prefers its scruples to its slovenliness. Morel stood, hatless and exact, measuring the distance between the table and the door with his eyes the way some men measure the distances between their lives. Madame Huret was first to go. She did not offer her hand. She took the air with her when she stepped into the hall and left behind only the ghost of pears and a line on the carpet where her heel had pressed. Lognon followed her as far as the doorway, as if escorting a procession that had never formed, then returned to the threshold to lean his shoulder against the jamb with an air of having prevented mischief by standing where others would have stood if he had not. "Good night," Madame Prévost said to the room, and received 4 different versions of it in return. She smiled at the one she liked and drifted to the stairs, the hem of her dress speaking softly to each riser. "Go on," Maigret said to Roussel, almost fatherly. "Write your paper while the ink knows what to do." The boy nodded, grateful to be told what his next 5 minutes were. He slipped out and up, light as breath. Desbois looked toward the door that led to the street, then toward the kitchen, as if the usual path could not be taken without the house first giving its consent. "I'll have a coffee," he said to Madame Darras, who had been holding herself very still at the edge of the scene. It gave him a reason to sit and not offend the beginnings of the night by rushing at it too quickly. Maigret stayed where he was, coat open, hands in his pockets, the unlit pipe stem touching his lower lip. He felt the weight of the room ease by ounces as each person withdrew a share of it. Morel did not move. He had the manner of a man who knows that leaving and staying are equally conspicuous. "Go when you like," Maigret said at last, almost kindly. "I have no place to be liked," Morel answered with a half-smile that borrowed wit from weariness. He glanced at Lise. "May I speak to Mademoiselle alone?" "No," Maigret said, in a tone that made refusing sound like relieving someone of a duty. "Speak here or not." Morel's mouth made the shape of words that would have been tenderer if the room had belonged to them. He let the shape go and looked at the broken cup instead, as if it could be convinced to offer him a strategy. "I did not take more than the paper says," he said, to the cup, to the table, to the idea of being believed. "I can be many poor things, Inspector. I am not at present a thief." "At present," Lognon muttered, because he needed to. Maigret did not answer either of them. He watched Lisa, who had not shifted since the others began to go. Her hands rested in her lap, palms turned slightly toward each other like two people who had agreed to speak later. "When you fell," he said, not looking away from her, "you did not fall." She lifted her eyes then, and in them he saw not fear so much as relief that someone had named the smallest part of it. "No," she said simply. "You lay down," he continued, "because it bought you a minute and bought the room a story. It kept Madame from asking more questions, and it gave you, Mademoiselle, a way to be ill, instead of impolite, when Monsieur arrived to be told no." She nodded. "There was a noise in my head," she said, with the honesty of someone who has matched words to a memory and is surprised to find they fit. "The cup. It sounded like the end of a thought. I wanted time to pick up another before he came. You wiped the floor badly on purpose," he added, almost approving, "so that the crescent should explain itself to anyone who needed it." Her mouth moved, not a smile, not a sob. "I am a woman," she said. "We tidy and we don't. It is how we choose what remains." Morel exhaled through his nose, a sound without contempt that wished to be one. "You were always good at arrangements," he said. "Even your refusals have a place to sit." "Better a chair than a bed," she replied, so gently that the words did not sting. Madame Darras brought cups with roses and set them down as if to reassert the house's ordinary law. She poured for Desbois and for Lise and left the third cup empty beside the halves of cornflower porcelain, the way a plate is set for a relative who never comes at Christmas. "Coffee?" she asked Morel, because she was a landlady before she was anything else. "No, madame," he said, and pushed his chair back a little without standing. "I'm not tired." "People who aren't tired at this hour in Paris," Desbois observed without malice, "have been sleeping the wrong parts of the day." The front door clicked again, and Rain wrote a few words on the hall tiles before deciding they could be read tomorrow. The house took a breath. Maigret let his pipe fall to his palm. "You will go to the office in the morning," he said to Lise. "You will give Huret the paper. If he chooses to write another for himself, let him. He is allowed his bookkeeping." "And me?" Morel asked, irony drying on his tongue. "You will avoid puddles," Maigret said, as if granting a man a minor vice. "And you will return the hat you will be tempted to borrow. I don't mean the felt. I mean other people's weather." It might have ended there, with the small mercy of an evening put back into its place. But rooms with broken things are restless. Something in the air had been waiting for the sentence that would let it sit down and could not find its chair. The student came half running down the stairs, paper in his hand, the ink still shiny in one corner. He stopped in the doorway when he saw Morel still seated and Maigret still present, and tried to arrange his breathing to look less like youth. "I wrote it," he said, and held it out with the anxious pride of a boy offering clean hands to a mother. "What I owe. What I can give each week. If I die, I will not finish, but I will try not to." Maigret took the sheet and did not read it. He folded it once and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. "It is yours," he said. "You keep it. If I keep it, it becomes proof of something. In your pocket, it is only a promise." Roussel blinked, uncertain whether to be disappointed or relieved. He slid the paper into his jacket and in doing so, knocked his elbow against the sideboard. One of the rose cups chattered against its saucer and then settled. The little sound emptied something out of Morel. He shut his eyes, opened them, and looked up as if at a ceiling only he could see. "I did go to the cinema," he said, not to anyone, the confession choosing him rather than the other way around. Not into it, to the door. I waited because I have not known how to enter places in years. I think that is my habit, Inspector. To stand near the life I want and hope someone who is braver will arrive with a ticket. "You found women," Lognon said, his voice less hard than his words. "They are the kind to take pity on a man in the vestibule." "I found people who hear a sound and call it a thought," Morel corrected gently. Madame Huret with her careful coat, the girl with the scarf, the cloakroom child who cut apples into moons. I wanted... He stopped, shook his head, as if it would be untidy to say the rest. "It is nothing. You are right, I avoid. That is my crime." "We don't have a name for that on paper," Maigret said. "It still hurts houses." Morel laughed once, a dry little sound that had been waiting behind his teeth. It was not much, but it broke something that needed breaking more than the cup had. The tension that lives in shoulders when a man is about to be smaller than his suit went out of him. He rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers and looked 10 years younger and not at all happier. "Go home," Maigret said, and Morel nodded, stood, and went without making the door angry. When the hall had taken him and the rain had accepted him, the room exhaled properly. Desbois finished his coffee, set the cup down with the exactness of men who return tools to their hooks. "I will be late if I am not careful," he said to no one in particular, and left, taking with him the portion of quiet reserved for men who sought other people's things. Madame Darras gathered saucers, then put them back in the same place because habits must be returned to their shelves before they can be used again. Roussel hovered, wanting to be asked to do something and afraid of being thanked for it. Madame Prévost's radio upstairs found a waltz and decided to keep it low. "Leave the pieces," Maigret said, seeing Madame Darras's hand move toward the cornflowers. "They have not finished talking." She obeyed, grateful for the reprieve of a small disobedience turned into obedience by decree. He went into the kitchen with Lisa. The room was warmer there by virtue of the stove, and the fact that kitchens collect day-long thoughts the way pots collect steam. She stood at the sink with her back to him, and he waited, because standing is what he used instead of questions. "I didn't faint," she said again, practical as someone describing the grocery. "Account. I lay down, because I could not think of a better thing that wasn't cruel." He nodded at the back of her neck, which was paler than her face. "You chose the cornflower cup," he said, not as inquiry. "For her," she said. "It was a way of telling her that I know what belongs to mothers and that I see her as one. I thought she would understand a cup more quickly than a word." "She did," he said. She rested her hands flat on the draining board. "Do you think I have done wrong?" "I think you have done housework," he said. "It is the kind of work that leaves a room as it was and changes everyone in it." Her shoulders shook once, so slightly that a stranger would have called it chill. When she turned, there were no tears. There was relief the way a kettle is relieved when it knows the lid will not rattle anymore. "Will they come back?" she asked, meaning trouble, meaning folly, meaning the people who carry both. "Yes," he said. "But they will choose a different room. This one will remember today and not let them." He left her with that, because leaving someone with a sentence that can be lived in is better than leaving them with a promise. In the hall, he met Alain Darras, who had the look men get when a long day has survived them, and not the other way around. "You will sleep," Maigret said, almost cheerfully. "I will," Darras said. "Because the inspector says so. That's something to tell a wife." "She knows better than either of us," Maigret said, and the man laughed in a single breath. Outside, the rain had turned to a fine powder that lay on the streetlights and made halos that belonged to no one. He walked without hurry. He passed the cinema. The vestibule was empty, the cloakroom shuttered, the posters glossier in the damp. He imagined Morel standing there a week ago with his hands in his pockets, practicing the kind of waiting that passes for intention. He imagined Madame Huret stepping in with her careful coat to give back to a stranger the thing he could not be bothered to collect for himself. At home, Madame Maigret had left a plate inverted over a slice of cheese and a note that said nothing more than the hour in her hand. He put the note in his wallet beside the coupon without thinking why. He lit his pipe and sat by the window while the night showed him its patience. Broken things, he thought, have their uses. They tell you how strong the hands were that could not find a gentler way. He slept and woke in the same chair, not sure when one had become the other. Morning found him with the smell of last night's tobacco and a faint ache in the back that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with the weight a room carries when it is trying to be decent. By 10 he was on the boulevard again. The canal held the same colour as yesterday, with a diligence that almost made him scold it. The import office door was open. Men moved through it as through a throat that cleared itself to speak. He did not go in immediately. He stood on the pavement where the stone remembered more feet than the ledger remembered names, and he watched the doorway until Huret appeared in it, with a face that had been explained to itself over coffee. Everything will balance, Huret said without greeting, and meant the sentence to be a ledger entry and a prayer. My wife told me before I could decide what to think of her. It is her right to be early, Maigret said. Huret gave a short, dry nod. Morel? We'll step carefully until he forgets why, Maigret said, and then he will need you to be squared at him again. And the girl? She will go on writing what men try to forget, he said, watching a barge nudge under the bridge like a cow finding shade. It is work. Huret looked over his shoulder into the office, where a young typist had a scarf in a thin blue and fingers that made neat mistakes. You will not open a file. I have cups, Maigret said. They broke in a way that told me what I needed to know. He turned away as if from a scene that had finished without applause. The day was the same grey as all honest days in Paris, and his shoulders found their usual place under his coat. In the boarding-house parlour, the cornflower halves would still be lying side by side like two people who had said what they had to say and were now waiting for someone to put them in a drawer. He would tell Madame Darras to do it in the afternoon. It would be a decent hour for endings that were not endings, but a kind of rest. The office settled around the matter, as a room settles after someone has moved a chair and then put it back. Men came and went, with papers they had always carried. At 10:30, Lise entered with her coat folded over her arm and her hair pinned with a pin that had decided things long ago. She did not look at Maigret in the doorway. She looked at the comptroller's desk, the way one looks at a church step, and waited. Huret had his jacket on this time. He stood rather than sat, as if figures behaved better when confronted at the same height. She held out the coupon, creased now where her fingers had pressed it last night, and he took it without impatience. He looked at the 500, and then at the faint pencil Tuesday that had imprinted itself on the back from another life. It is not yours, he said, and she inclined her head. It is not anyone's, if it is written down, she answered quietly. It belongs where you say. He lifted the blotter, slid the coupon beneath it as if taming a fly, and then set the blotter back. He did not thank her. Thanks would have mistaken the moment for generosity. You will prepare the petty cash page anew, he said. From last Monday. If there is a mistake, it will be mine. She nodded. Yes, monsieur. Madame Huret came at 11, earlier than her pride would have chosen, and later than her conscience would have liked. She wore a different coat that did not want to be admired. She spoke to her husband in the inner office with the door not quite shut. On the corridor, Lise wrote 2 neat columns and let the voices be nothing more than weather. The typist with the blue scarf arrived on the half-hour and arranged herself into the room like a bookmark. She glanced at Lisa, curious and kind and useless in equal measure. When the door opened at last, Madame Huret stepped out with a face that had decided its posture. She looked at Lise and then away, and then back again, as if obeying and disobeying the same instruction. "Mademoiselle," she said, "I was wrong to visit you. I'm going to spend the day discovering smaller ways to be right." Lisa did not answer. The sentence had not asked for one. She went on writing, the nib whispering over the paper like a woman in church too devout to cough. Outside, the canal bore the same grey with a respect for sameness that would have made it a good clerk. Maigret stood on the bridge and allowed an extra minute to the barge moving under it, though the barge had asked for nothing. He crossed and went along the towpath where puddles sat like coins that had decided not to be spent. He found Morel leaning on the parapet with his hands in his coat pockets, not looking at the water. The man had the air of someone who has mislaid a habit and is waiting near the place he last remembers using it. "You sleep?" Maigret asked, joining him without greeting. "Enough," Morel said, which meant poorly and with the wrong kind of thoughts. He looked at the inspector sideways. "I did not go to the office. I am practicing absence." "It comes naturally," Maigret said. They stood a little while. A wind used the water as if learning to write. On the barge, a woman shook a rug with the determination of someone who believes dust has a moral life. "I put 200 under her door," Morel said at last, and smiled once, briefly, at himself. "That was my thought in the night. Return what is not enough, and perhaps the rest will add up. I woke and found it still inadequate, which is a discovery a man should make earlier in life." "She will bring it to the office," Maigret said. "They will dislike counting it and be grateful to have counted it." "I know," Morel said. He watched a dog on the path decide each puddle separately. "I am not a thief, Inspector. I am something less clear and therefore more irritating. People forgive thieves. They do not forgive men who use rooms as shelters from decisions." "You like vestibules," Maigret said. "I like being near," Morel answered. "When one is near, one can pretend one is already inside." They walked away from the water together without saying they would. On the corner they stopped because a handcart made them stop. It was easier than making a decision for themselves. "If you leave your hat somewhere else," Maigret said, "do not come back for it. Let it be a hat that belongs to that place. You are less dangerous when you do not carry a claim." Morel's laugh had no teeth in it. "I will try," he said, and they parted. At the market on Rue de Bretagne, pears were arranged with the tenderness greengrocers reserve for things that bruise at a look. He bought 2 because it felt like keeping a promise he had not made aloud. He took them home at noon because Madame Maigret judged pears at noon, not after. She turned one in her hand, smelt it, and set it in the window where the light decided to be better. She refused the number, she said, before he had told her anything. Not a question, not a triumph, merely the recognition of a sensible act. She refused to be the place it lived, he said. They always think they can put a thing down where they picked it up, she murmured, meaning women, meaning everyone. It is rarely so. He took from his pocket the smaller of the 2 halves of the broken cup. He had asked for it as one asks for a button at a seamstress, without stating why. Madame Darras had been happy to lose authority over half a problem. He placed the shard on the table. Madame Maigret lifted it, turned it in her clean fingers, touched the edge with her nail, and held it to her nose the way women do to decide whether linen is truly fresh. Still there, she said. Pears and starch. She held it the way someone holds a decision, with both hands, and then she did not want to any longer. She said her mother did the same, he told her. Then she learned the wrong thing correctly, she said, and put the shard down as if it might hear. In the afternoon, the boarding house wore its weekday quiet like an apron. The cabbage had been replaced by soap and boiled towels. Madame Darras had opened the landing window for its 5 minutes. It shut with the satisfaction of a ritual observed. In the parlour, the two halves were gone. In their place, a dishcloth lay folded on the end of the sideboard, as if the absence needed a cloth. "You told me to put them away in the afternoon," she said, pleased to have a time for it. "I have a drawer for things that are waiting to become dust." "That is a good drawer to have," he said. "Keep it." She hesitated, then took a slip of paper from beneath the dishcloth. "This fell," she said, "from behind the cupboard when I moved it. It is nothing." People often announced a paper's value this way. It was a bill from the grocer's near the canal. Flour, soap, kerosene, candles. At the bottom, in the same neat hand as the coupon numbers. "Paid, Tuesday." He turned it over. A faint transfer of pencil from some other page. Umbrella. He smiled. Umbrella in the hand of a man who avoids puddles, unused. "Keep it," he said, and she looked offended at being cheated out of the pleasure of contributing to the investigation. "It belongs with your dust." Roussel came down with his paper in his pocket and his cheeks colder for having washed them. He carried himself with the relief of boys who have an arithmetic now and not merely numbers. "Madame Prévost says I wrote per week, as if it were a love letter," he said, half laughing at himself. "It is a love letter," Madame Darras said tartly, "to a future that would otherwise forget you." He found Lise in the kitchen, not in the parlour, helping peel potatoes as if the gesture could peel the day down to what could be cooked. He did not speak to her. He cut the peel too thick because he feared doing otherwise would look like showing off. She let him. Desbois came by the hall at 5 to collect his scarf, this time without forgetting it. He had shaved again. Men who live by night have a seriousness about their faces. That day steals if you let it. They weighed the parcels early, he told Maigret, because telling something to someone dignified his day. At the exchange, they say the clocks will be fixed next week, as if time were something you could repair with a screwdriver. "You can, if it is a clock," Maigret said. He found himself drawn once more to the cinema vestibule, as dusk gathered itself for evening. The cloakroom shutter was half up. The apple girl sat with a different fruit, a pear this time, and a smaller knife. She brightened at recognition, in the way of people whose day improves by filling a space with a familiar face. "The hat?" she asked, eager to report on her piece of the world. "The lady brought it back this morning. She said it belonged to no one after all, and that I should keep it until the rain had forgotten it." "What did you do?" he asked. "I put it on the top shelf," she said. "For the winter. It will be company for the umbrellas." He thanked her and walked back along the boulevard. He thought of Morel's words on the bridge. "I am something less clear," and of Lise's careful refusal, which had been less a no than a placing back on a shelf. He thought of Madame Huret turning the shard in some remembered kitchen long ago and learning a method for stopping what could not be said. Night came with the ordinary indifference Paris lends to other people's accounts. He went home through courtyards that smelled of onions and iron. The concierge nodded to him as if she had decided he was someone who had finished what he started. Madame Maigret had laid 2 plates and cut the pears. She had chosen the knife that does not tear. After supper he did not smoke. He sat with his hands open on his knees, thinking not about the figure 500 and not about the man who avoided puddles, but about rooms. Some rooms are good at being witnesses. They hold the smell of a perfume long enough to make a story sensible. They keep a drawer where a broken thing can rest until it decides to be dust. They tolerate a man standing in a doorway if he is quiet enough to be furniture. At 9 the telephone rang once and then again. He let it ring twice and then once more, because he liked the way decisions become themselves, if not hurried. He lifted the receiver, as if it weighed slightly less than the broken porcelain. "Inspector." It was Huret's voice, made flatter by the distance and the moral that had been pressed into it. "I thought you should know. The girl brought what she had. My wife brought what she had. The man, Morel, sent what he had. It is enough to make the page whole without the embarrassment of formal lines. I will not have the police in the ledger tomorrow. I thought you would appreciate a quiet total. I do, he said. You have done the thing correctly, which is not always the same as doing it well. Thank you. He replaced the receiver and looked at the pear knife on the plate. Madame Maigret was darning a sock with the patience of a church. It balances, he said. It will unbalance, she said. Not pessimism, but the arithmetic of living. Then you will go and stand in a doorway again and look at a cup. He smiled without showing it. A man could be happy in a life that made sense by such small acts. He thought of the cornflower halves in Madame Darras's drawer and felt, absurdly, the desire to see them at rest. Later, when the street had quieted into the respectable noises of people who were either asleep or wanted their neighbours to think so, he walked once more to the boarding house, not to ask anything, not to scold or to bless, only to be there. The bulb above the mustard door, ill-tempered as ever, cast its little circle. The hat peg was empty. That pleased him. Inside, the hall smelled of soap and the end of cabbage. Madame Darras appeared from the kitchen with a dishcloth over her shoulder. She looked at him the way landladies look at policemen who come in the evening for reasons other than work. I put them in the drawer, she said before he could ask. I told them to be quiet. They listened. He nodded. You are a good jailer, he said. Better for cups than for men, she replied, and laughed softly into her cloth. He stood in the parlour with the lamp unlit and let the room be itself. On the sideboard, the rose cups sat in their row with the satisfied look of objects that have outlived a scene. The table bore no ring now, only the faint memory of one. Outside, the rain started again and then changed its mind, a Parisian habit he had never quite ceased to find reasonable. Upstairs, a radio tried a march and then chose a lullaby. Roussel's step went across his room and back. Lisa's chair moved once. Desbois, already at work, would not walk here until dawn. Somewhere, a woman set a pear in a dish because she had decided the kitchen looked better when it held an intention. He left without sound and crossed back to the boulevard under a sky that intended neither clear nor wet. The case had never been a case. It had been a house keeping itself from unkindness. Tomorrow he would put a note in his book that said nothing at all. The rain found him halfway and gave up. He walked like a man who had learned again that the world balances in small ways and that sometimes a broken cup is the only honest paper a day will sign. Morning came with a lighter grey, the sort Paris offers when it is tired of explaining itself. At the office, the radiator clinked as if coins were being counted inside it. Someone in the corridor laughed too loudly and then remembered where he was. Files lying on Maigret's desk had the calm of paper that belongs to routine. He touched none of them. He took the small shard of cornflower porcelain from his pocket, turned it in his fingers as a man might turn a thought, and set it on the blotter where it looked both out of place and exactly right. The telephone rang once, then again. He let it go on until it had decided to insist, and then lifted the receiver. It was Lognon, who sounded as if he had slept in his coat. You will be thrilled, Lognon said in a tone that suggested its opposite. No complaint, no report, no theft, no scandal. I have nothing to put on a form. You have a free morning, Maigret said. I have a morning in which my superiors think I have concealed excitement under my hat, Lognon replied. What shall I tell them? Tell them the weather is responsible, Maigret said, and hung up before the man's offence could gather shape. He did not stay at his desk. The city put on its day like a shirt with a frayed cuff, presentable, decent, honest about its wear. He took the long way to Rue de Bretagne, buying a newspaper he did not open and watching the pavement decide where to be dry. At the greengrocer's, pears were stacked in a slope so precise it seemed a reproach to the rest of life. He bought one, not because he wanted it, but because some sentences are better spoken in fruit than on paper. The boarding-house door took his hand as if it had been waiting for it. In the hall, the mustard paint had achieved a kind of serenity. The peg where the hat had hung was bare, a small absence that felt like a lesson carried out. From the kitchen came the respectable sounds of a morning. Water poured not quite to the brim, a spoon on the rim, the little cough of a stove satisfied with itself. Madame Darras appeared with a cloth pinned to her waist. She seemed larger in daylight, the sort of woman around whom a house organizes itself the way children organize around a teacher's desk, even when school is over. "You are early," she said, proud of predicting him. "Not early," he said. "On time for nothing." He nodded toward the parlor. "May I?" She followed him in, hands folded out of habit rather than need. The table was bare now. The lamp looked smaller in daylight. On the sideboard, a faint cleared space revealed where the cornflower halves had lain and where the cloth now sat folded like a conclusion. "I put them away," she said, as if confessing to a minor betrayal. "As I told you." "You have a good drawer," he said. "It is the drawer where I keep old keys and small photographs people forget to ask for back," she replied. "And the spoons that do not match, they are not guilty. They are just themselves." He took the half cup from his coat pocket and held it out. "One was missing," he said. She looked at it and at him. "You keep souvenirs?" she asked, without scorn. "I keep reminders," he said. She took it between finger and thumb, weighing something that had no weight. "It has done its work," she said. "It may be dust somewhere else." He shook his head. "Let me keep this one," he said, with the courtesy of a man asking to be allowed his own superstition. "For my drawer." She hesitated, then blew the smallest breath that contained a smile. "You and your madame have drawers also," she said, and her tone made the two women allies without their having met. "Keep it. If a police inspector wishes to remember a cup, I will not be the one to stop him." He put it back in his pocket, not hiding it, simply returning it to where it had already chosen to be. "Lisa?" he asked. "In the market," she said. "She went early to buy what is not cabbage. She said she owed the house a sweetness." "Roussel?" "Upstairs," she said. "He came down to show me the paper, and I told him to show it to his wall. It is walls that hold boys to promises." "And Desbois?" "Sleeping," she said, lowering her voice. "The night has to be folded carefully, and he is the one who knows how." He thanked her for telling him nothing and everything, and left the hotel smell for the odor of the street. On the market square, he found Lisa with a purse that had known other hands and a look of someone who had decided to buy pears and was satisfying herself that the decision had not been foolish. She weighed 2 in her palm and put 1 back. When she saw him, her shoulders settled, as if the day had organized itself into something doable. "They are expensive," she said, as if he had asked. "All honest things are," he said. She considered that. There was room in her to consider things without needing to say she agreed. "I went to the office first," she said. "I gave him the paper. He did not say thank you. He put it where papers go when men do not wish to think about them anymore. He telephoned me last night," Maigret said. "He said it would balance." "That is his word," she said neutrally. "It is not mine." "And yours?" "Enough," she said simply, and the word had more mercy in it than triumph. "We will have stew tonight. Alain kills garlic well." "Madame Huret?" he asked. "She does not come here today," she answered. "She will prefer a room where there are more chairs." He left her arranging the pears in the basket so they would not bruise one another and cross toward the canal because the water had its own arithmetic, and I like to check other people's by it. Morel was on the towpath. He had no hat and a coat that had remembered a better winter. He saw Maigret and did not look away. There was something in his stance that had altered, not pride, not shame, only the smallest acknowledgement that vestibules are poor places to sleep. "I went to the cinema," he said, before being asked, with the air of a boy who has returned to the place of his mischief in daylight. To return the hat. The girl put it on a shelf and said it belonged to Winter. "She is right," Maigret said. "I thought I might—" Morel began, and then stopped. He looked at his shoes with a twinge of amusement at himself. "Never mind. I'll walk." "Where?" Maigret asked. The kind of question that told a man the police could be curious about his destinations, even when not required to be. "Anywhere that has puddles," he said, and this time the smile reached his eyes. He stepped off the curb into a shallow pool of yesterday's rain without performing the delicate dance he had always done, and the ripples went out in circles that were not a promise and not a penance, just water being itself. On the bridge, a woman with a basket of carrots tucked a stray hair and looked relieved to see the inspector's bulk. People like seeing certain figures where they expect them. It makes the day feel more legible. He tipped his hat and went on. In the afternoon, he found himself in a cafe not far from the post exchange, where men, if left alone, would sleep at the table between cups. He ordered a beer and let it go warm. Desbois came in at the end of his night, upright, in a tired way. "You are still here," the night worker said, as if daylight might have taken him away. "I am," Maigret said. "They changed a clock," Desbois reported, lighting a cigarette like a man putting a period on a run-on sentence. "It now lies in a different way." "That is all time ever does," Maigret said. They drank, not together, but in the same room. When Desbois left, the chair remembered him for a while, and then forgot, which is the correct etiquette for chairs. On the way back, he took a street he rarely used. Paris has streets that keep their faces for strangers. This one let him pass without remark and returned him to the familiar as a favour. Outside the boarding house, the boy from the cafe dragged bottles in. The crate clinked a polite conversation with the pavement. He went inside to say nothing to no one and found Madame Prévost in the hallway with a letter she had not opened. She offered it to him with the ceremony old women give to the mailman. "From my sister," she said, proud that life still wrote to her. "She tells me our brother has married a younger woman. Men will always find someone to keep them right for a little while." "Perhaps she will," he said. "She will for a year," Madame Prévost decided. "Then she will discover his habits are older than she is." She tucked the letter into her shawl and floated up the stair with the satisfied air of someone assured of being right later. Lisa looked in from the kitchen and lifted a knife to show she was busy. Roussel came down with a book not required by any class. He had the purposeful air of someone who is going to the library, because it is the place where promises are less frightening. He greeted the inspector, as if saying thank you for something he could not name in public, and left with his scarf properly wound, the loose thread tucked away, as if shame. By late afternoon, he had nothing left to do there without manufacturing it, which he did not believe in. He went home with the shard in his pocket, and the pear pressed to the memory of his hand, even though he had left it in Madame Darras's basket. The apartment welcomed him with the familiar smell of soap and wool, and the unpretentious ease of two people who have kept each other's time. Madame Maigret had her sewing things spread like small instruments. She did not look up when he came in. She knew the temperature of his presence as some women know their own kitchens. He put the shard on the mantel. The cornflowers caught the light meanly. You could barely see their blue. He moved it a little, and then a little more, and then decided to leave it where it refused to be pretty. "You will trip on that with your eyes," his wife said without looking. "It will make me pick them up carefully," he said. She threaded a needle with the patience of the city. "Do you ever think," she asked, "that people do not change?" He considered, weighing the question with the same caution he had used for the cup. "People adjust," he said. "They sit differently on the same chair. That is sometimes enough." She nodded, accepted the answer as adequate to the day, and bit the thread. Evening laid itself over the boulevard, as if it had been folded well. He stood at the window with his pipe. He did not light it. The rain gathered itself somewhere else and spared their street. He thought of the lodging house where stew would be ladled and the scent of garlic would make the hallway less severe. He imagined the pieces in the drawer, not accusing, not forgiven, just being permitted to be themselves where they could do no harm. He thought of Morel stepping into water and discovering he could still be a man when his shoes were wet. He thought of the cloakroom girl and her knife, and of apple slices and pear slices, and the small, stubborn housekeeping of the city that continues whether a case is written down or not. When the telephone rang, he let it ring twice. He did not pick it up. A man is allowed an evening in which the ledgers of other people's lives go on without him. He turned from the window, set his pipe down on the rim of the ashtray, and sat. The shard on the mantel threw back a dull little shine. It did not ask to be understood. It only asked to be left where it could do its work, which, after all, was to remind him that there are days when the truth comes quietly, breaks along a neat line, and is put away, not fixed, not shown, simply kept. The radiator ticked. The street breathed. From somewhere a waltz came up thin and then settled in the wall. He let the city's modest noises attend him and felt without sentiment that he had been useful in the way a heavy door is useful, by standing, by opening at the right moment, by closing again without fuss. The world makes a great many scenes. Someone must keep the rooms steady while they are made. He did not think of it as virtue. It was a kind of work, like peeling potatoes without wasting too much or mending a sock so that it does not show. When he rose to put out the lamp, the room had the settled look of a house that knew where its things were. He left the shard on the mantel. He did not say anything to it. He went to bed and slept the way good engines do after a day of pulling a heavy train on ordinary rails, deeply, without dreaming, ready to start again in the rain if that was what the morning asked. He wrote the report the way he liked such things written, on one sheet, with margins breathing and nothing in them to excite anyone's curiosity. He put the date, the address of the boarding house, and 4 names, all of them ordinary. No offence proved, he wrote. Domestic matter involving a small advance repaid. Suggestion made to comptroller that ledgers are for numbers and not for pride. Broken crockery unrelated to injury. He paused, added, recommend no further action, and after a moment, visit made to cinema cloakroom. Property left there to be considered abandoned. It was, in its way, a ridiculous piece of paper, and exactly the right one. He took his pipe down and left it unlit. Outside his office window, the late afternoon carried a paler grey, the kind the city uses when it is tired of reviewing itself. He went out with his coat unbuttoned and his hands in the pockets, walking without urgency toward a day that had already learned most of what it wanted to know. At the canal, the wind had changed its mind and now moved lengthwise along the water as if remembering a rule. He stopped on the bridge without deciding to stop and watched 2 boys argue with a stick and then hand it back and pretend there had never been a quarrel. The barge below had new laundry on its line, dull towels that would be better for being clean than for being bright. He found himself thinking about the cup again and the way it had broken. There was no mystery left in it, and still it explained people more quickly than they explained themselves. Back at the boarding house, the mustard door had a cleaner look. The stair runner had been straightened by someone who could not bear that particular slant. He did not ask. Houses tell you who has been tidying as surely as they tell you who has been making a mess. In the parlour, the lamp was unlit, and the sideboard had recovered its ordinary row of rose cups. On the mantel, a bowl with apples sat where the cornflower halves had been. The bowl was cheap, but had the honest weight of something meant to be held often. He stood a moment, and then turned at the sound of a chair leg on wood. Lisa came from the kitchen with a dish towel on her shoulder and the look of someone who has decided to be tired later. "We are making stew," she said, as if he had asked. "He puts a bay leaf in because his mother did." "That is the correct reason for bay leaf," he said. She nodded, not smiling. "I thought you had finished with us." "I have," he said. "I came to see a room that knows it can breathe again." She glanced at the sideboard, where the row of cups had not quite the same spacing as yesterday. "I put the pieces away," she said. It felt like telling the day it could go to sleep. He let the silence after that be the conversation. She folded her towel in 2, and then again, and set it on the table's corner, as if marking a page in a book she would return to. On the first-floor landing, he met Roussel, carrying a thin book on economics, as if it might give him a language in which to ask less of people. He had his scarf wound in a sound way, and the loose thread hidden somewhere only he could find. "I wrote the schedule," he offered, unnecessary and proud. "I showed it to the wall." "Walls are good at remembering," Maigret said. The boy went past him, light as breath, and made the stairs into a kind of apology. From somewhere above came the decent murmur of Madame Prévost's radio. It kept a march for 3 bars and then changed its mind and settled for a waltz. People like waltzes when there is nothing left to prove. He did not knock at Desbois' door. Men who work at night deserve their sleep and their closed doors. The hallway smelled of soap and onions and a little of boiled wool. It was the smell of decency, and it pleased him. He found Morel on the pavement outside, not waiting exactly, standing the way men stand when they have not yet chosen a direction and wish to look as if they have. The coat was the same, the shoes were still unremarkable. He had a hat now, but it was a different one, too stiff and too honest for him. "You returned it," Maigret said. "The girl kept it," Morel answered. "She said hats have a kind of lodging in winter." "That is sensible," Maigret said. "And you?" Morel looked along the street where a van struggled with a corner and then pretended it had meant to stop. "I went to the office," he said finally. "He was not there. I left a note without a name. It said that I would not be in rooms for a while. It is a coward's phrasing, but it matches me." "You could say what you intend to do," Maigret suggested. "I never intend," Morel said without self-pity. "Perhaps I will learn how. Perhaps one starts by choosing puddles on purpose." He took off the stiff hat as if to test whether it wanted to be his. It did not. He put it back on anyway and, after a breath, lifted it slightly toward the inspector in a gesture borrowed from a better man and therefore not entirely wasted. He went away without performance, and the street accepted him the way streets do when a man decides to be smaller to fit through his day. By late afternoon, the cinema had lit its vestibule to pretend at glamour. The cloakroom shutter was up, and the apple girl had pears today, cutting them with a neatness that proved she had not needed the larger knife at all. She saw him and brightened with the exact measure of someone who is not sure whether the world has improved and is glad at least to see a familiar coat. "It will be cold," she reported, as if the weather were a shared sin. "I have a stool with a cushion. The hats like it." "Hats are easily satisfied," he said. "People less." She gave a small philosophical shrug. "Only until you learn to put them on the right pegs." He left her there with her little wisdom and her pears and walked toward the river with a step that had decided to be neither quick nor slow. A tram rang for a reason and then for the habit of it. He lit his pipe and let it go out. He liked the weight of it more than the smoke. At home, the table had been laid with the unthinking correctness of custom. Madame Maigret had cut bread. She had warmed plates at the rim of the stove. He put the shard on the mantel where she had left a space for it without admitting she had. He told her about the stew planned in the lodging house and the bay leaf with the correct reason. He told her that the office would balance by the evening and perhaps unbalance again by spring. "We mend what we can and keep drawers for the rest," she said. She poured him beer halfway and topped it after a beat, because she understood that men like to see a thing completed, even when it is only a small glass. He ate, and after, he took a walk as if to pay the street back for having carried him earlier. He ended at the quay, where the river is a fact, not a picture. It squared his day for him. He put his elbows on the parapet and watched the low light turning the water into something like metal that had chosen not to shine. He thought, not about guilt or innocence, but about what the broken cup had said. How it had been used like a punctuation mark by a woman who did not want a word to become a promise. How a saucer in a bin can be cleaner than a saucer on a shelf. How a spill wiped badly explains a kindness without making a speech of it. He thought of Lisa lying down in the parlour to turn noise into time. Of Morel learning that stepping into water does not drown a man. Of Roussel writing a schedule because youth must be given a task. of Huret choosing to be correct instead of fierce, of his wife and her towels folded with the satisfaction of a problem understood and put in its proper drawer. He smiled to himself, a small inward thing, and turned back toward the boulevard. It would rain later, or it would not. Paris would decide. He found that he did not much mind either way. In the end, mystery had been only the usual one: why people do what tidies themselves when no one is watching. Why shame chooses a cup and pride chooses a number. Why the smell of pears can carry a room back to an old kitchen, where a mother taught a daughter a clumsy way of stopping a sentence. He stopped at the cafe on the corner, not because he was thirsty, but because a man should let the city see him at the hour when it counts its cash drawer. The waiter brought him a beer without being asked. Foam sat on the lip like a small white hat. Across the street, the boarding house windows took the early dark and decided to stay gentle. He could almost hear the spoon against the pot. One of the rose cups would be set aside for him if he went in. He did not. A man cannot be everywhere he is welcome. When he returned to the office for the last few minutes of day, the radiator had found its even tick. He put the report in the tray where forgettable papers live and felt a practical contentment. On his blotter, the shard caught a stubborn square of lamplight, more dull than bright. He lifted it, considered wiping it, decided against it, and slipped it into the drawer where he kept pencils and a comb and the odd small reminder that the world explains itself sometimes without intending to. He turned out the lamp. In the dim, he heard the city perform its modest rites, the lift cables sighing, a tram bell pecking at a corner, shoes agreeing with stone, water finding a path to the gutter. He went home where a sock waited with its heel showing and a wife with a needle that never hurried a knot. He slept as he preferred to, with the window cracked and the weather allowed its say. If he dreamed, it was only of cups that break cleanly and are not glued, of ledgers that balance long enough for everyone to breathe, of hats left on pegs when they belong to winter. In the morning there would be another call, another room with its own drawer of mismatched spoons and promises, another small mystery that wanted to be put away rather than solved. He would be there, present and quiet, until the room remembered how to be decent again. That was his work. He did not need more of a conclusion than that.